and so I came back to this world and spent the next 8 weeks recovering. Now, I go into all kinds of detail in Proof of Heaven, and even more so in this more recent book, Living in a Mindful Universe. So I don't want to dwell on that anymore, but I love sharing that spiritual journey because it is by far the most beautiful part of this. But of course, what people want to know is, was it real or was it a hallucination? Now, the reason I'm often asked to speak to medical groups, nursing groups, etc., is because they realize from the medical facts of my case that my experience was impossible. It could not have happened. Meningitis is the perfect model for human death. And I had a very extreme form of meningitis that devastated my neocortex, the outer surface of the brain. That's the part that makes us human. There was no way I could have a hallucination or a drug effect or a dream of any sort because I didn't have that part of my brain left going. And that's why it is so stunning. And to me, the deepest mystery is with all the evidence my doctors had of the progressive destruction of my neocortex, what I knew from the experience was that progressive destruction actually allowed for a robust expansion of consciousness far beyond anything I'd ever experienced in this world. Now, I'd never read the near-death literature before because I always thought it was a bunch of hooey. You know, hallucinations of the dying brain, who cares? Well, when you start reading those experiences, what you find is more than half of the people who have them describe them as far more real than this world. This is the dreamy, murky realm. That is sharp, crisp, real, alive. So in fact, the exact opposite of what one might think should happen when you die and the brain shuts down. It's the opposite. We are conscious in spite of our brain. The good news is, as we point out, living in a mindful universe, this is really the only way out, not only for spirituality, but for science. This merger is crucial. It is not a material world. Over the issue of consciousness itself, we've come to prove that very strongly. In fact, one of the key investigators to determine this fact scientifically is Canadian, or was Canadian, Wilder Penfield. He worked in Montreal. He wrote a beautiful book in 1975 called The Mystery of the Mind. And he's in better position than just about anybody on earth to comment on the relationship between brain and mind because he spent much of his career operating on epileptic patients with an awake craniotomy. Now, I've done a lot of those myself. It turns out the brain feels no pain, so you can do a big operation using local anesthesia in the scalp and a lightly sedated patient. Huge operation with the brain fully exposed, then let your patient wake up completely. Talk with them, have them moving and all that, and they're perfectly comfortable. They're amazing experiments, but Penfield did this through his whole career and came to the startling conclusion, based on electrical stimulation of the brain in all these patients over 3 decades, that the brain does not create consciousness at all. He's crystal clear about that in his book. You will not find free will in the brain at all. And in fact, a lot of his work initially suggested that memory might be stored in the brain, but the more he worked with that, there are great details, and I've been through all those details of his work. I know exactly where he went with that and what he faced. But he ended up realizing memories are not stored in the brain. And that in itself is one of the biggest nails in the coffin of neuroscientific materialism that there is. We've never been able to find any location for memory in the brain. Not only that, through neurosurgical experience, we realize the brain acts as if no memory is stored there at all. The brain is a filter or a transceiver. It's a reducing valve. It is not the creator of consciousness. In fact, its main function is to limit and inhibit and restrict conscious awareness down to this tiny trickle. And that has survival value. But it also creates for a very interesting scenario. And that's something that Karen and I will talk about. So this is very much about the mind-body discussion, the relationship between mind and brain. And of course, most people don't really think about that. You know, who cares? Let the neuroscientists figure it out. But it is of absolutely crucial value to all of us to get better answers to that question of the mind-body discussion. And the reason for that is that any notions we have of meaning and purpose in our life, of free will, even such deep questions as an afterlife, reincarnation, these are all absolutely dependent on the mind-body discussion. Now, this is not a new discussion. It's been going on for more than 2,400 years, since the time of Plato and Aristotle. One would think after more than 100 generations of humans, we might have gotten close to an answer. Well, it turns out, yes, we have come very close, and not only just recently, even thousands of years ago. In the deepest mystical traditions of East and West spiritual traditions, they were getting very close to that answer of oneness, of the connection of consciousness with all of us, and a connection with God, with an infinitely powerful, all-loving force at the core of the universe. They saw that very clearly. But of course, in the last 400 years, the rise of the scientific revolution, and remember that when that revolution began, if people like Galileo and Newton and Bacon and others, if they got too close to the world of mind or consciousness, they were treading the hallowed ground of the church. They were likely to be burned at the stake. And that was really burned into their genome. Study the material world. Don't be thinking about something like consciousness, mind, soul, spirit. And so they didn't. They studied the material world. And lo and behold, what do they discover? You can't answer the questions within one material universe at all. Quantum physics came up 100 years ago, and that is absolutely the central message of quantum physics. Not only does quantum physics allow for spirituality and God, in fact, quantum physics absolutely demands spirituality. That's what that measurement paradox in quantum physics is all about. In quantum physics, the deepest mystery is that awareness, what is known as the observer. And that part presents incredible challenges. And that's what the meditation that we're going to share with you is all about developing, because all of the things that we talk about has tremendous relevance to each and every person in this room and what you can do to connect to that universal mind, connect to the universe, because in fact we are all one with the universe in a very deep sense.
If we're living in a mindful universe, a universe where consciousness creates everything, that's a very empowering thought. Now, if you're used to thinking that the material world is there and I'm separate from it and I'm just meaningless and everything that happens around me, I'm just a victim of, or a victim of circumstance or something, what we're suggesting to you is the opposite may be closer to truth. And so if your consciousness, your awareness, and your attention is actually helping to create the situation around you, and the collective of our one mind is creating what's going on in our world, I think it behooves all of us to become more aware of how that actually works. Now, we don't know the mechanism. The scientists, they all want to know the mechanism. I want to just know, if I do this, what happens in my life. So it's kind of like performing little experiments on your own. You do not need scientists to tell you this is true. In fact, many scientists will tell you you're a nut if you think that's true. And they do. But there's, again, Henry Ford's quote, those who believe they can and those who believe they can't. And they're both right. Okay? So we all need to be empowered to kind of getting to know that inner part of ourselves, the part of us, that observer, that's not our thoughts. Just one little belief being flipped like that can change everything. And so when we talk about this practice of going within, what we're really trying to do is kind of rise above the drama of life and really get a different perspective. Eben had that beautiful gift on his journey of complete amnesia. So when he came back, he was able to not sort of turn to his teachings that he had here on earth from science and his religious upbringing, but he was able to look at it from a very fresh perspective. So we can actually ourselves build a very neutral perspective in our own lives and be able to look at things that happen in our lives that sometimes seem so unexplainable. Why would this happen? Now, there's a lot of hardship in our world, and there's a lot of hardship in our personal lives. And a lot of times when we're out speaking, people will ask Eben, you know, why? Why do we have all these hardships? Why would God do this to us? We are here to have experiences and drama, and sometimes it's not pretty, but it's all about those interrelationships, the experiences we have that bring us what we are here to do. You know, Tony's lovely story about his departed wife. All of us have stories like this. Why does this happen? One other story, actually, this is in Living in a Mindful Universe. A young lady was very upset that she had lost the love of her life after only knowing him for 1 year. And she went through some hypnotherapy and flipped her belief on that. She was so upset. Why would you take him away from me for only 1 year? And the answer was, no, no, no. I stayed around a year longer so that we could have that experience. And so it all really is based on your perspective of things. And when you can flip that perspective and find that neutral space, like we will talk about later through forms of meditation, it can be so, so valuable to learning how to live your life here and now. Now, Eben is going to switch back to Eben, and he's going to talk about that drama and why hardships are important here on earth.
Yes, it was very apparent to me as I was recovering from my illness and going through this incredible spiritual journey that I had had, that all those hardships and difficulties in life, and certainly as a physician, that would include illness and injury, it was clear to me that they were actually gifts. They were part of the growth. It's how we deal with the hardships that allows our souls to grow. Now, another point that we get deeply into in Living in a Mindful Universe, in this whole position of metaphysical idealism, you end up realizing that not only are our lives here and the events in them very, very important, they are the reason the universe exists. It is not a cold material world where there was some accident of life forming on planet Earth in a distant part of one little galaxy, and that's all there is to it, and that it's cold and chaotic. The universe exists to provide the stage on which the drama unfolds of the lives of sentient beings. And again, this is not about you getting through this particular hardship in our set of hardships in a life down here in this, quote, imperfect world, because in many ways I came back from my journey with tremendous gratitude for every breath. And this beautiful sense not only of the gratitude, but that all is well. At every time, all is well. And this is something that we also teach in this meditation. By developing that relationship with the higher soul, we can gain a certain form of kind of that, and developing that the observer. We can use that to actually get a much more balanced look at our life, not driven down there in the weeds by the ego and its petty little concerns, but one where we can see that bigger picture. See ourselves in perspective with all the higher souls of those involved in anything we're going through in life. And we can actually use that to learn and grow in that moment from that higher soul perspective. And more ideally, in every thought and action, manifest in our choices, our free will, love, compassion, forgiveness, acceptance, and mercy. And one of the most important things was my realization in coming back here that what was really the problem with this world was not that I didn't love my neighbor enough or my enemy enough. It's that I didn't love myself enough. That is absolutely crucial. Thank you, Ottawa. It will always be a beautiful memory to us that we came here for this third book, because we think if Proof of Heaven took us 1 mile towards the goal of awakening and understanding, this next book, Living in a Mindful Universe, takes us 20 miles towards that goal.
100.
And is part, or 100, and is part of bringing science and spirituality together, because they cannot move forward independently. And this awakening will lead to a far kinder, gentler, more loving world. So thank you all for coming. God bless you, Ottawa. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming.